someone told me that they believe there's a player who's in the Final Four of the Stanley Cup playoffs who has reached out about it. Which I don't think they should. Yeah, it's Connor McDavid. That's yes, it's McDavid. He's defecting right in the middle of the playoffs.
And with that, the Stanley Cup Final is set. Welcome to 32 Thoughts, the podcast presented by the GMC Sierra Elevation. Elliotte, it's like 2004 all over again. The province of Alberta versus the state of Florida, but it's not Tampa and Calgary. It's Florida and Edmonton 20 years later. Your thoughts on how we got here. The Dallas Stars, who threw everything at Stuart Skinner, including 35 shots, to Edmonton's 10. The Dallas Stars come up a little bit short. The Edmonton Oilers win this series in 6. They now face off against the Florida Panthers. We'll get to them in a couple of seconds. But you were at the rink. You were there. I remember being in Edmonton in 2006 with CBC and my producer, Tracy Lightfoot. It was we went to games against San Jose and against Anaheim. And I don't think I had ever been inside a building that was as loud as Edmonton was. I didn't even go to the final against Carolina. But just in the Anaheim series and the San Jose series, it was a deafening experience. How was it on Sunday night?
It was deafening. There were times I absolutely could not hear what was going on the air. First of all, I want to say it was one of the best crowds I've ever seen in terms of being at a game. And I joked about this in the post-game hit, Jeff, but when you're a hockey fan in Canada, and there's for good reason sometimes, there's a feeling of impending doom. Like you want to believe that you can win. You hope to believe that you can win, but you really believe that in some way, some deity that no one has ever heard of, that maybe only 35 people in the world know, has placed a curse on your team that is going to prevent you from victory. Maybe you get a bad bounce. Maybe somebody gets injured. Maybe a bad call. Maybe the other team just beats you, but you always believe that you're going to lose. You hope for the best, but assume the worst. This is one of the few times I can really remember walking into arena, and just from the people I was talking to in the field in the building, this was a crowd that thought the Oilers were going to win. They did not care. They believed the Oilers were going to win. They were never nervous. Even when the Oilers started poorly, even when the ice was tilted, like we saw all the records tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Fewest shots by a team to win a conference final, 10. They didn't just edge it. They smashed it. The previous record was 17. Worst shot differential by a team winning a conference championship, minus 26, beating the previous record, minus 23. They erased Kevin Bieksa from the record book because that was his 2017 Ducks that were involved in that game. But the crowd was never nervous. They never thought they were going to lose. Even when Dallas scored to make it 2-1, like, did you hear them in the last 3-4 minutes? They were so loud. I couldn't hear
for every clear
Simpson.
Every time Edmonton cleared the puck,
let's go
they went
Oilers.
Nuts.
Let's go Oilers. And I couldn't hear Cuthbert. I couldn't hear Simpson. I tried to hear McDavid's interview with Kyle. I'm going to listen to it after we taped the pod. I couldn't hear a word of it. It was deafening in there. Like, I've been lucky enough to be in some great crowds. The Bird's Nest in Beijing, 91,000 people watching Usain Bolt win the 200. I remember being there. The Olympic gold medal in Vancouver in 2010 for the men. Like, I've been very lucky. I've been able to be at some incredible crowds. That was as good a crowd as I ever heard. And, you know, on some level, I do think they willed the Oilers to victory tonight. When my career is over and I am fired, which could be next week, but that's a night I'm always going to remember. Always going to remember.
Well, there's a few things to remember from that one. First of all, the McDavid power play goal early, the first shot on net in the proverbial stick handling in a phone booth. How many times have you heard that cliche? Oh, this guy could stick handle in a phone booth. That's how tight it was for McDavid. And that's Miro Heiskanen that he did that to Elliotte, which is not lost on anybody.
Well, can I talk to you about that one for a second?
Sure.
So someone sent me a text and they said, this shows McDavid's incredible hockey IQ. Tanev would have been there normally as a right-hand shot, but he's in the penalty box. So Heiskanen's there, and McDavid sees that. It's left-hand shot versus right-hand shot, and you can see Heiskanen's all twisted. That is McDavid turning an elite Norris Trophy caliber defenseman inside out because he recognizes Heiskanen's on his weak side. And that makes that goal even more incredible to me, and which I didn't think was even possible.
There was another goal that was pretty interesting to me, Elliotte. I say halfway tongue-in-cheek because the 2-0 goal, again, a power play marker, this one from Zach Hyman. I don't know about you, but I'm not used to seeing Zach Hyman score from distance. And for Zach Hyman, slot is distance. Snap that thing in short side. It wasn't like go to the far post and tap it in off a shin pad or an elbow pad or off the tip of his stick. Zach Hyman scored from a little bit of distance on this one, Elliotte Friedman.
Yeah, everything weird happened. The team that had the ice tilted against it won, and Zach Hyman scored from distance.
Okay.
I just have to say, like, just the joy. I was trying to decide, like, who were they most happy for, the Oilers? Were they most happy for Nugent Hopkins because he's been there the longest, Ekholm because they love him, Skinner because he's been up and down, Nurse because of the heat he took. And I want to remind me to talk about that in a second because I do want to talk about a conversation I had with a couple Oilers about that. McDavid and Draisaitl just because they're the leaders, Hyman because they love the guy. I mean, name it. Like, there were so many people you could tell that these players were happy for. And when the players did their hands, because they had all lost their sticks, so when they did their gloves up in the circle at the end, like, the place was deafening. It was, it was interesting. Amber said to me at the end of the game, if the Oilers win the cup, who gets the cup right after McDavid? And I know we're really getting ahead of ourselves here, but these are the kinds of things that you talk about. But, well, Amber goes from this is a natural disaster to this is the greatest thing that ever happened in a faster than the world's fastest car goes from 0 to 60. Like, he is seriously bipolar. But he talks about this kind of stuff, and he said, who gets the cup after McDavid? And I was like, A, don't talk about that. And B, you know what? That's a really good question. There could be a lot of choices.
I would think, to get ahead of myself on this one, see, it goes captain first, and then I default to the longest serving member.
That's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins.
Right. So that's where I would default. The only thing that would interrupt that, if it's someone that has a remarkable story, something they've overcome, someone at the end of their career who might not be the longest serving member, but they're wrapping it up and they may have just been on your team for a couple of years, something like that. But my default position on it is always longest serving member of the team. But again, so who would you way ahead of ourselves.
If Florida wins, let's even this out. Okay, let's even this out. So Barkov takes it first. Who gets it second?
Okay, so let me go and try. Hang on. Give me a second here to go look and see.
I don't want Panther fans throwing like hot dogs or pretzels at me because I didn't do this for them when I get down to Florida. And to me, while you're thinking about it, Ekblad would be the guy. Unless
Ekblad's
they pulled a total surprise and did Paul Maurice second.
I know what you're going for there. But can't
players
see the Panthers
hate coaches,
doing it.
No.
Coaches withhold ice time. It's Aaron Ekblad. It's longest serving member. Maybe, but again, like, you go back to the Philadelphia draft when they took Aaron Ekblad. Things weren't looking great for the Florida Panthers, and he stuck through a lot of bad teams.
Anyway, this is a ridiculous conversation. I can't believe you started us down this road.
David Amber did, technically.
Yeah, that's true.
One thing I wanted to mention here. I just want to throw that out there, because I want to annoy you a little bit. Although I think you'll like this one. So you talked about Connor McDavid's suits on Sunday night. His last 3 games, the McDavid suits, right?
Yes.
And I think you mentioned he wore different pants.
No, I was wrong. They look dark on the first one, but I think they're the same green ones.
Okay, so you know where my brain went on this one? And I've always thought this was brilliant. Now, this may not be 100% true, But the basis of it, I believe, is there are some that disputed, but nonetheless, go with me on this one.
Okay.
You know who used to always wear the same suit and had a closet with 7 identical suits in it because he didn't want to waste time deciding what to wear when he got
Richie
dressed?
Rich.
No, close. Albert Einstein.
The Einstein of hockey, Connor
that's
McDavid.
that's what I'm going for. Do you know what color the suits were that were in question?
Gray?
Correct. He had 7 gray suits.
Oh my goodness.
In his closet, 7 identical gray suits in his closet. Now, some people have disputed it. He wore a number of different things, but by and large, the suits that he had were all, if not identical, at least similar. And the story always was that Einstein didn't want the pain of having to make another choice in his day, so just bought 7 gray suits and wore those.
You know what? If someone walked up to McDavid and said this to him, he would give them the pure McDavid snarl.
It's so good. It's so good. It's so good.
He's got a great evil eye, and you would get it.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, can we talk about Nurse for a second?
Nurse had a great game, and Nurse had a huge block shot at the end. Holy smokes.
He was really great after the controversy. And I don't want to get so much into that. I want to talk about the matchup and what we're about to see here. But I wanted to include this in the podcast because it was a really interesting conversation. I talked to a couple people about, that the day where Nurse took a lot of heat and he had the really short scrum and kind of the fallout and then he had a massive game with, I guess it was down to 11 hits. They took one away, but still phenomenal. He played great after that. And he had a good scrum this morning where it looked as if maybe not all is forgiven, but all is kind of put behind everybody. But I'll tell you what someone said to me, and I backed it up by talking to a couple of other people. I think this is really interesting. They said to me that the Oilers understand, and I'm talking about the other players, they understand criticism of a guy needs to play better. Like, that is not what bothered them. But what bothered them in this particular case, and they have raised it before. I don't know if they've raised it publicly, but they have definitely raised it privately. And one of them mentioned it to me, is that they really get angry when Nurse's salary is brought up. That to them crosses a line. And, I said, well, salary cap, this kind of thing. But you know what they said? They said, that is BS. Okay. I said, okay, why? I'm hearing you out. And he goes, it's not his fault that he was proposed that contract and he signed it. And so they feel when that gets brought up on Nurse, it crosses a line and it's unfair. Now, people may disagree with that. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But that is how the players feel. And when they get mad about that specific criticism of Nurse, that is what they think. They think it is unfair and crosses a line because any player in the league would have signed that deal.
100% true. My comment on that would be, when you bring up salary, that's not a criticism of the player. That's a criticism of the manager.
Yeah,
that is,
no,
players
I'm not,
players think that it's a criticism of them.
No, it is.
That's a criticism of the manager.
You can't. That to me is that to me is a weak defense because anybody is going to take that personally. Anybody is going to take that personally.
But then on the one hand, everybody would take the deal. That's not your fault.
It also gets brought up as we have to get rid of this guy because he's making this salary, and they don't think that's right.
But that's the reality of the conversation around salary caps. You don't have to like it, and it's uncomfortable, but that's the reality.
I'm just saying that is the way. That is why those players take it so personally, because they did take it really personally. Sometimes I feel that what we don't think enough about is we look at how this affects one side of the equation, and we don't necessarily think about how it affects the other side of the equation. And I just thought that was a real interesting window into why the Oilers players get so mad about it.
You have a thought on Kris Knoblauch through all of this? Like when you look at like moments that change the team profoundly, usually we think of a big trade. Not so much. The most profound move this year that altered the course of a team's trajectory this year was the hiring of Kris Knoblauch. I was thinking about this a while ago. I wanted to bring it up here on the podcast. The first time I had someone say to me that Kris Knoblauch was going to be an NHL coach was 2017 at the Memorial Cup in Windsor. Erie Otters had just lost to the Windsor Spitfires. Rocky Thompson coaching the Windsor Spitfires, Kris Knoblauch coaching the Erie Otters. And you know who told me someday this guy's going to coach in the NHL?
Jeff Jackson.
Correct.
Because he said the same thing to several people.
In 2017?
I don't know if it was 2017.
That far back.
I don't know if it was 2017, but I heard it for a while.
Yeah.
Are you trying to say that you broke the story?
No, all I'm saying is that was the first. No, that was the first time I heard anyone say that.
I don't know. It sounds like you're trying to take some credit
because
here.
Jackson had a couple. When he was working for Orr Group, and then Wasserman, he had DeBrincat and Radish on the Otters team anyhow, and was impressed with how he handled his clients. I would imagine. Anyway, that was the first time that I heard his name in NHL.
You know, it's to me the whole thing is really interesting because the Oilers were struggling when Jay Woodcroft took over, and he righted them. Like he righted his ship there. Mm-hmm. And who were a lot of people picking at the beginning of the year? The Oilers. And we were talking so much about the Oilers, and particularly Woodcroft, who I think is a good coach and will get another opportunity. So much that other teams were like reaching out to us. Can you stop freaking talking about these guys already?
Yeah.
And now here they are. And you're right. They didn't get off to a great start, and they made the change, and they righted themselves again. You know, first of all, I think Knoblauch has made a lot. This has been talked about a lot. He's made a lot of big decisions in these playoffs that have worked. He has shown he is unafraid, and he's got big guts. Big guts. He's not afraid. But I think the biggest thing in the Oilers is, I'm going to have to go back and listen to these, Jeff, but do you remember at the beginning of the year, we did a whole bunch of interviews with Edmonton players.
Oh, yeah.
And
remember what they all said?
We talked about why they lost to Vegas. And everything they talked about, there was depth. And we all, like, I thought Dallas had the best depth in the league. Edmonton out-depthed them in this series. It was also, what did Draisaitl say? It was along the lines of, we would have this one shift where we just lose the game. A mistake would cost us the game. And, like, I everything that they said they learned from last year, they learned. Like, I think the players here deserve a ton of credit, because the Oilers have gone from McDavid and Draisaitl create magic and everybody else is along from the ride to everybody on that team checks. Everybody on that team pays attention. Like I'll tell you something. Like, apparently, I heard that. So in Game 5, Corey Perry threw a kind of a weird drop pass, and everybody was like, "Why is he doing that?" I think I have the play right. If I have the play wrong, someone will let me know and I'll figure out the right play. But Perry threw kind of a weird drop pass for Draisaitl, and Draisaitl wasn't there. And we kind of wondered, was Perry, because he'd been hurt with his shoulder early in the game, did he not feel like he could shoot? And the second thing was like, where was Draisaitl? Like, what was going on? Mm-hmm. And Kris Knoblauch, he said that Draisaitl deserves a lot of credit for that play, because maybe he wasn't there, but it was because he was looking to check his defensive responsibilities to make sure he wasn't leaving anything that could turn dangerous. And how many times had we heard about something like that about Draisaitl and McDavid in the past? Not as much. Like, we knew they were really determined guys and they wanted to be great, but they were always thinking offense first. And I think when your best players are like that, everybody's like that. And I think Edmonton has changed the mind of how people perceive them. And I think the other guy deserves a ton of credit is Skinner. Because 2 weeks ago, he lost his job. And in Game 6, he had the biggest game of his life and the biggest moment. Like some people were like, oh, it's the old Ali rope-a-dope. And I think at times they were putting a shield around him and daring Dallas to get through it. But there were other times they were holding on for dear life. Like a 7-year-old at Six Flags. Like they really were on a roller coaster. And Skinner was great. Like the one goal was a really good goal. It was a really challenging play. And It was going to take a really good goal to beat him. And I give the guy a lot of credit. A lot of credit.
So 34 saves for Stuart Skinner in that game. And Kelly Rudy, I'm not sure. Listen, you couldn't even hear Cuthbert and Simpson. I don't know if you heard the studio. Kelly Rudy after the game said that's the best game Stuart Skinner's ever played.
I would agree. I would totally agree. And you know what? Like, the one thing now, and I want to turn our attention to Florida a little bit here. Skinner's going to have to be that guy again. And the one thing about him is, and this is the next level for him, he generally has one game a series that you say, uh-oh. And there was less of that this series, and he's recovering from it better. I don't know if he can have an uh-oh next series because he's facing a guy who just outdueled Shesterkin, who was the best goalie of the playoffs, and is at a level that high himself. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about Bobrovsky that I really respect about him was he has bought into what Florida has sold him. And that is that you can't play all the time. You need rest. This is why. And when you get rest, you're better. And once again, Florida's going to have a week off between games. And, I know everybody hates the 2 days off on travel days. In an Edmonton, Florida series, these teams are going to need it. Like this, I saw all these stats. Ron quoted one that this is the longest series in NHL Stanley Cup history. The viewers may not like it, and the fans may not like all these days off, and I get all that. But it's going to give both teams the best chance to win. Because if we had to play every other day with this travel, it would catch up to these teams. Never mind the reporters covering the series. Oh. We would definitely not make it. We'd start with 200 reporters.
Someone think of the reporters,
and down to 75 at the end, yes. But the players would be spent. They just wouldn't have enough gas. And that is one of the things that gives Florida a good advantage going in, is that Bobrovsky's going to be rested. So Skinner coming off, I agree, the best game of his career, he's going to have to be even more consistent to give Edmonton the best possible chance. Jeff, one thing in the room after the game, I just asked Matthias Ekholm, what's the biggest thing that you'll tell your teammates about going to the final with Nashville in 2017? And he said, we fell behind 2-0 and we couldn't crawl out of that hole. He said, we have to start on time. And Florida will, because they were there last year. And he kind of talked about the enormity of the moment. Like you get to the Stanley Cup Final for many players for the first time, and you think you're ready, and then all of a sudden you blink and it's over before you realize. Adam Henrique, same thing. He went to the Stanley Cup Final with the Devils in 2012. And remember, they were down 3-0 to the Kings before they really made that a series. And got to 6 games. But that's what Ekholm said that he will tell them. He says, you cannot fall behind 2-0. Like you have to get in. You have to start right away. And I thought that was an interesting point.
Okay, let's get to Florida here. But one more closing thought here on the Edmonton Oilers. When we were in Edmonton for a training camp, I did all those interviews, as you mentioned. What was the saying? Cup or bust. Cup or bust. From the Edmonton Oilers. Well, they got there. And for all those guys that stuck to their guns about it, congratulations. And Corey Perry, now with his 5th team going to the Stanley Cup Final.
A record.
Is remarkable. Anaheim, Tampa, Dallas, Montreal, and now Edmonton. Okay, so let me share something with you from a conversation that I had with someone on Friday on my way home from the radio show. This person brought up, and this is someone who's been around hockey forever, who said to me that he believed that the Florida Panthers were a replica of the Boston Bruins 2011 team that won the Stanley Cup. Not necessarily player for player. There is no Chara. on this team. There's no Chara anywhere.
Yeah, that's kind of a big hole in your argument, though.
Well, that is.
This is like the 2011 Bruins without Chara, Marchand, Krejci, and Tim Thomas.
There's Marchand. There's Marchand. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there. In how they were built and how Bill Zito put this team together and how they play. Now, there's one obvious comparison, and that's Barkov and Bergeron. And how many times have you heard me make the lame joke that Barkov is finished for Bergeron? But the comparisons are undeniable. But you look at how Bennett plays, and you look at how Reinhart plays, and, there's that number 19 again. What's his name? Matthew Tkachuk. And you look how he plays. Like, there's more similarities, Elliotte, than differences from that 2011 Boston Bruins team. No, and I know, yes, Chara is a gaping hole, but no one outside of Montreal with Larry Robin. Yeah.
So I'm going to be. So I'll give it to you, Jeff. I'm just a nice guy.
I know that's what everyone says about you.
I am really like the Sportsnet stats group had an unbelievable stat about Barkov. No goals against Kucherov. One goal against Pasternak. No goals when they were facing Panarin. Like he was on the ice for an hour and a half against these three guys in the first 3 rounds, and they scored once against him. So the Barkov for Bergeron is 100% there. And I'm really looking forward to seeing whoever they match him up against. But, the other thing, too, about him is, remember, it was a year ago, just before the final, I think it was in the first round last year, where, we were among people talking about, can you win with this guy? He's just not mean enough. And the whole thing about it is you can be a nice guy off the ice, which he is, but you still have to be, he's among the nicest guys. But when they're on there, you got to be mean. And, he has at least found that. And, it was a few podcasts ago, we kind of talked about how, and almost, not the Gretzky era, obviously, Lemieux era, but there was an era in this league that he probably could have been an MVP candidate, won a Hart Trophy. I just think it's so hard now with McDavid and Draisaitl and Matthews and, McKinnon and Cale Makar, who I think will win one someday. I think it's just going to be so hard, but to me, he's a Hart Trophy level player now.
Yep. One of the interesting things here, and I think this is another obvious statement, but all of a sudden, Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett have re-entered the Alberta chat.
Yep.
And we all think of some of the wars that Sam Bennett had with players like Evander Kane, for example. And we think of the battles that Matthew Tkachuk had with everybody on the Oilers.
Boy, you know what? That is a great call. That is so good by you. Evander Kane admitted during this series that it was a little harder for him because Dallas wouldn't get involved in the scrums. That's not going to be an issue against the Florida Panthers.
Yeah. And that specifically Sam Bennett.
Absolutely. That is, for example, here's another good one. So Zadorov and Kane had a real battle in Edmonton, Vancouver. And early on in that series, it was going Zadorov's way. I had a couple of other guys who told me that Kane deserved a lot more credit than he received for that what he did with Zadorov. Because they said at that series went on, he kind of canceled Zadorov out. It was like, that's a Kane Zadorov thing. We don't have to worry about that. That's what the other Oilers were kind of like thinking. And they said that he didn't get enough credit for how much he kind of took that away from the rest of the Oilers. Now, in this series, he didn't really have that. He got hurt for a little bit in Game 6. But, they really felt, and I didn't ask anybody about this again. I'm going back in my head. In the aftermath of that Edmonton-Calgary series, boy, is it good on you that you brought this up. In the aftermath of that Edmonton-Calgary series, they felt he took Tkachuk out of the series. Like, remember Tkachuk made the money sign at him? They were like, I remember the Oilers said later that was a really bad idea. Now, Tkachuk, I think, is a bit of a different player this year. He can still be a pain in the ass, and he can still be very tough. But, one of the theories is that after the body trauma that he went through last year in the Vegas series, and that bad injury he suffered, that Tkachuk learned that he has to pick his spots a little bit more, because he was a target because he made Vegas so mad. And so I really wonder if he'll be even interested in re-engaging in that. He might just say, I have bigger goals here and I'm going to leave this alone. But I know the Oilers really thought that when Tkachuk made Kane mad, Kane took Tkachuk out of that series. Like, he wanted no part of an angry Kane, the Oilers felt. I would bet now they'll say, look, you stay away from Kane because we need you here. But if it is allowed, but Kane will be engaged because those Panther guys won't go away from him. Oh, by the way, another Panther that could get the cup early. I can't believe we didn't think of this. Kyle Okposo.
Yes, but again, like the veteran guy chasing the cup his entire career just obviously hasn't been with the Florida Panthers as long as Aaron Ekblad. But I could see Okposo as well.
Don't forget Jamal Mayers. He got it pretty quick.
Yep, that's another good one. Absolutely. Let me drill down on one more thing here with the Florida Panthers. What do we talk about a lot in the playoffs? We talk about third lines and we talk about depth. We started this conversation with you talking about depth and how Edmonton out-depthed the Dallas Stars. One of the emerging lines here through these playoffs is the third line of the Florida Panthers, led by Anton Lundell, who's having a really great playoffs, and Listerainen and Tarasenko, who have not so very quietly, if you've paid attention, really distinguished themselves through the playoffs as an effective third line. No one thinks this is going to be easy at all if you're Edmonton. And just the fact that these three players, this line is hitting a stride too, that it's not just Barkov and Bennett and Tkachuk and Reinhart and Verhaeghe.
They're very deep.
They're good, man. And that third line is excellent. That third line is really good.
It's a really good and really deep team. And, there's a lot of things we should talk about the Panthers here. First of all, the extension of the Florida dominance. And I know there's a lot of debate about, the fact it's a no-tax state and the advantages they have. I don't want to hear about that when it comes to the Panthers right now. And you know why I don't want to hear about that? Because the Panthers were in a no-tax state for 30 years, and they didn't have this kind of success, right?
But can I add something there, though, to it?
Yeah.
They didn't have ownership like this, though.
Well, that's one thing. That's one thing, and that's my point. The Panthers weren't. The Panthers aren't successful now because they're in a no-tax state. They're successful because they're the best they've ever been as an organization. They have stable ownership and they make good decisions. Look at all the good calls they made. Look at all the good moves they made. The Bennett deal turned out great for them. The Tkachuk deal was very risky with what they gave up, and it's turned out very well for them. Oliver Ekman-Larsson as a pickup turned out to be great. Reinhart as a pickup turned out to be great. I remember Scott Lewis, who ran the draft when they drafted Barkov. There was a lot of criticism at the time for, it was McKinnon 1, Barkov 2. Drouin was a big stud back then. So was Seth Jones, who went right after him and said, no, that's our guy. But consistently now, the Panthers have made very good and very hard decisions. They got ripped when they fired Andrew Burnett and hired Paul Maurice. People just destroyed that move. But things have gone. They have made really good decisions. They're stronger financially. They've done a really nice job inside that arena, building some really nice lounges, trying to improve the experience of their fans. I took Steph and Max there late in the season, and Steph was like, the music here is really good. So, you can talk about no tax state for as long as you want with Florida. It doesn't matter what the tax rate of your state is if you're not a good organization. And that is why they are where they are. Because now finally, if you want to say that's an advantage, and I get that it is, they're finally smart enough, they know how to use it. When they finally said, look, why is Tampa so successful across the state? Because they use all their things that should be good about playing in Florida, and they make themselves a winner. Well, now the Panthers are doing the same things. And And now the Panthers are doing the same things. And that's the difference. The tax rate's not the number one reason. It doesn't matter if you don't know what you're doing. And finally, that organization has a better idea.
Ownership that's spending and investing and making great decisions. Now, you mentioned Paul Maurice a couple of seconds ago. Now, listen, everybody in this organization is enjoying this. The players are enjoying this. The managers are enjoying this. Like, the fans are having a great time with this. Obviously, you're in the Stanley Cup Final again, 2 seasons in a row. I don't know if there's anyone enjoying this more than Paul Maurice right now, Elliotte. These post-game pressers are must-watch and
the
must
Shane Gillis of the NHL.
These are incredible, Elliotte. He's having the best time.
Well, the thing is, too, and one of his real good buddies is Peter DeBoer, who had a tough one on Saturday. Although he joked about it on Monday, and he made peace with Tim Kalishaw on Sunday. Joked about it on Monday, and Peter DeBoer was fantastic in these playoffs. He was approachable. He was thoughtful. He was really fantastic to deal with in the playoffs. He was thoughtful. He was approachable. He was accommodating. He was really a pleasure to deal with. And when that happened on Saturday night, it sort of came out of nowhere because you had no reason to believe it was coming. It just happened. And the thing that said to me was it was the pressure of the moment. Dallas was going so well, and that night on Saturday night, they looked like they were running out of gas. Even when they were playing Game 7 against Vegas or they were going against Colorado, I never really thought they were in trouble. Even Game 7 in Vegas, I was confident that Dallas was going to win. That game after Game 5 was the first time I really looked at Dallas and I said, oh boy, they're in trouble. And I think he did too. And I think that came across in the moment. And, obviously he thought, although he apologized for it the next day, he thought that there was some questioning about the commitment of the team. Paul Maurice hasn't had to deal with any of that. They beat Tampa in 5. They beat Boston in 6. They beat the Rangers in 6. I've never looked at Florida in these playoffs and said, oh boy, this team's in real trouble here. And so Maurice has been able to be the way he is because he's never, I don't, even though Dallas, like I said, was in a Game 7, I don't think they ever looked over the abyss really until now. And Florida hasn't had to do that at all. So, it just shows you that you could be the most approachable coach, but when you really think, oh boy, we're in trouble, that can change at the snap of a finger. By the way, the other thing I wanted to mention about Florida too is in the third period of that game against the Rangers, shots were 9-2 at some point. You would think the Rangers would be coming after them. Florida just completely smothered them.
Smothered. Just it's a smother. They were ending that game. They were ending the series.
It's a great team.
A little bit later on, we'll talk about what's next for the New York Rangers. In the meantime, what's next for the Dallas Stars? We have people like Matt Duchene, UFAs. We have Chris Tanev as a UFA. We wonder about things like Ryan Suter buyouts, and we wonder about the future of Joe Pavelski.
Yeah, I wasn't in the Dallas room after. I had some other things I had to check out, but those guys I heard got really emotional when they were asked about Pavelski. And Joe Pavelski, 2 years ago, he signed his extension in March, and last year he signed his extension on January 1st, which was the first day he was eligible. If you sign a one-year deal, you can't sign an extension until January 1st. So, they always knew he was coming back, and he said, I'd like to do it early. I think we saw the writing on the wall this year. And, Pavelski, I thought in the first period of the game was really dangerous. He started on the fourth line. He got moved up to the first. But the way the Dallas Stars were talking about him post-game, I think we all know where this is going, right? So he's a Hall of Famer, and he's a hell of a player. And, if it does happen, I think a lot of people are really going to be sorry to see him go. He had a great career, 7th round pick Great career.
2003 draft. Remember, we always talk about it.
Yes, and he will leave as big an impression off the ice as he left on it, and that's a real credit to him. You know, I believe that they want to keep Tanev. There will be a lot of competition for him. I believe that they want to keep Duchesne, and I think Duchesne is really open to that as well. I think they also know they've got to do. There's some big contracts coming. Wyatt Johnston is eligible for an extension this summer. Thomas Harley needs a new deal. Jake Ottinger is 1 year away from needing an extension. Jason Robertson is a year away from being eligible. He's got 2 years left. So they've got some flexibility, but they've got some big deals coming. And the one thing that I know that they have talked about is just make sure we have our planning right. So they're looking at Ottinger and they're looking at Johnston, and they know that they can't do anything that makes it impossible or jams up their cap or with them ruins their cap. But I really do think they'd like to keep Tanev, and I really do think they'd like to keep Duchesne. So we'll see.
Jamie Benn, 1 more year remaining on his deal. So that one comes off the books, whether it is completely eliminated or there's an extension at a lesser amount. He has one more year on his deal there. Glad you mentioned Thomas Harley, who had a really good season this year for the Dallas Stars. That one to me feels like a bridge here as they try to get to your point, as they try to shift money around because there are big deals on the horizon, but we'll see which way they go here. I mean, Dallas will once again be an interesting team to follow for a number of different reasons here. This window is still wide open for Dallas, by the way. And Maverick played in that last game, and there's one that's on the horizon, probably be a full-timer as soon as next season. So things still looking good for the Dallas Stars. I know that sucks to be a Stars fan right now, but still, great season for your team. Really, really good season. All right, Elliotte, now time for the news. News on the march, as we like to say. What do you make of, and now there's a website, Major League Hockey, the proposed fall launch of the new 3-on-3 league? What have you heard? What do you know? I went through the website. I have my questions. I've talked to people. I have other questions. What questions do you have?
Well, Steve Dangle was the one who first mentioned this story, and he got caught up in what I will refer to as a vortex of craziness. Mm-hmm. And then, he kind of backed away from it. And Brad Schlossman, who's a tremendous reporter, covers North Dakota, he did some legwork into it, and he found a lot more questions than answers. And it kind of went away for a little bit. But as you said, there's a website now, and I've had a chance to speak to some people, including some players who have reached out. And nobody's really comfortable going on the record, which I totally understand. And one of the reasons is that if you want any information about it as a player, you're asked to sign an NDA. So the players didn't really want to say much about it. But a couple of them did confirm to me that they had at least reached out to find out what exactly is going on here. And here's what I can tell you. Number one, I do expect some kind of announcement during the Stanley Cup Final about this. A revelation as to exactly what this is, what the goals are, and what they are trying to do. So I think the picture is going to become a bit more clear sometime during the Cup Final, which begins on April the 8th, next Saturday. Now, by the way, there was a chance the Cup Final could have started a little bit earlier had Dallas and Edmonton gone only 5 games. But as we know right now, that's not going to happen. So the Cup Final now starts the 8th. I do expect an announcement sometime midway through the Stanley Cup Final. There's a lot of questions about where the money comes from it. Is it Saudi? Is it Middle East? The only thing anyone would tell me is that the company that's behind this is not based in the Middle East. I think, but I don't know that it's based in Europe. And that doesn't mean I know necessarily where the money behind it is, but the company, from what I understand, is based in Europe. And I think there's a bunch of players who've reached out. They're curious about it. And I know you're going to talk about this, but they're talking about like a $30 million salary cap. People are like, look, if there's a chance to play hockey for money and legitimate money, people are going to be interested. So a lot of players have reached out. A lot of agents have reached out. And, someone told me that they believe there's a player who's in the Final Four of the Stanley Cup playoffs who has reached out about it. Which
Connor McDavid.
I don't think they should. Yeah, it's Connor McDavid. That's yes, it's McDavid. He's defecting right in the middle of the playoffs. But, someone said to me, like, that's an example of how much at least interest there is in finding out what this is about. But I think we're going to get a clue. And maybe some answers sometime during the Stanley Cup Final. Believe me, I understand all the skepticism, but I've really tried to find out, okay, what is going on here? And this is some of the best intel I've been able to get so far.
I talked to a couple of agents over the weekend who reached out as they're continuing to canvas and try to figure out what this thing is, because I think you have a responsibility to your clients to find out, to your point, what this thing is and if there's money available to play hockey. Going through it, I mean, there's a few things that are, pretty ambiguous, and as you mentioned, we're looking for an announcement sometime during the Stanley Cup Final. Planning to launch in fall of 2024. I think a lot of people are focusing on this $30 million salary cap. I mean, really, Elliotte, it can be a $100 million salary cap. It can be a $300 million salary cap. It says nothing in here about them having a salary cap floor or a minimum spend for every team. So you can make it a $100 million salary cap for all that you care. If you're not going to be spending that money and there's nothing that compels you to do so, what does it matter if it's $30 million salary cap? A $100,000 bonus is mentioned on the website as well. One of the interesting things here, too, is you try to canvas around and try to figure out, okay, which markets are they going to be in? And then moreover, which rinks are they going to be in here? On the website, it says that Major League Hockey has, quote, targeted franchise in 16 cities. Not done deals with or poised to announce or have secured 16 cities, but they've targeted 16 cities. And there's a world of difference between targeting a markets and having a markets. To the point about salaries as well, and how many pro players you can have on a team. On the website, it talks about 3 pro players per team and the rest of the lineup, which will be a 14-player roster, 12 players and 2 goaltenders, being made up by NCAA athletes, U Sports, Major, Junior, etc. It talks about scouts having already gone through a draft, and that'll be released at some point, to which point I have to wonder to myself, well, if we don't have any markets announced as they are targeting franchises in 16 cities, how do you complete a draft? They maintain they have coaches and managers. There's an email to apply for.
I'll say this: I believe that is true.
They have managers and coaches.
And the reason I believe it is because I think that there have been people who either aren't happy with their current setups wherever they're working or aren't in a setup at all who have reached out or have been contacted by them saying, do you want to come work for us? Mm-hmm. Like, I do think that that is real. I did reach out to one person who I don't know very well, whose name was sent to me, and they haven't got back to me, which says to me that there's something they don't want to tell me. Mm-hmm. So I think there is something to that. Like one thing that happened when the PWHL started up last year, Jeff, I think there were a number of executives who weren't happy where they were or were looking for a new challenge who reached out to them. So I 100% believe that there are interested individuals who have spoken to them, if not been hired by them.
I'm fully of the belief that there are interested individuals. I just don't know how many have either coaches or managers been secured so far for all of these markets.
I'm beginning to suspect on the website, at least one, judging from the fact that he's not getting back to me. Yes.
Okay, so we have one because as I mentioned last podcast, and you're reaffirming, sometimes around this time of year, people get swollen fingers, and they're not able to work on iPhones. So we'll see. I mean, then there's a whole idea of can 3-on-3 hockey work, and what type of appetite is there for it? I mean, that's for each individual to determine. I've always looked at hockey as a struggle sport and not one where necessarily you want to have 2018 games. Like every now and then a big blowout is fun and a big 8-5 game is fun. I just don't know if, I don't know if my appetite is there to see that on every rush turns into a goal or a scoring chance. I like it as a struggle sport, but we'll see. That's for everybody else to decide.
I think there's a couple other things I just wanted to mention about it. Number one, I think one of the big questions a lot of the players have, and I don't know that they got a straight answer, is the money guaranteed? That's obviously a big one. Is it going to be something where you don't necessarily have a guaranteed contract, but you'll be paid, whether it's twice every 2 weeks or twice a month? Obviously, a lot of players with NHL histories or pro histories are really curious about that, and that's something that needs to get done. Like one of the things that players asked about was, if it's one of the things that players asked about was, is it going to be like the NHL or the AHL or the KHL or wherever that you move and go live in your city? And what's travel going to be like? Things like that. Things that you sort of take for granted at the NHL level. Like I don't think these teams are going to be flying charters around. So
no, I don't think so. I don't just again, like so much of this is all speculation. You're trying to imply based on what you've seen, but it's going to be, according to the website, a Friday, Saturday league. So I don't necessarily know that you'll be compelled to live in the market that you play in.
Yes. I'll say this.
So it might be like, listen, it might be like NLL, like National Lacrosse League, where you're flown in for the weekend games.
There's obviously a lot of skepticism, and we all have our questions too. But like I said, I think we're going to get some answers in the middle of the Stanley Cup Final. Now, the one thing that someone said that was really interesting to me is they said that who they would go after if they were this league, and see if he would be interested. Phil Kessel.
Oh wow, that is
because Phil Kessel wants to play.
Of course,
he tried to go to Vancouver last year. It didn't work out, obviously, but I'm under the impression that he does not want to retire, and he still wants to play.
Marketable name,
and said if you're going to go after someone to try to make them like a little bit of the face of your league or add some legitimacy. Said one of the guys they would go after is Phil Kessel. However, they also said you've got to make sure it's legit because you don't want to piss that guy off.
Nope. I don't think he wants to be part of anything small time. So we'll see where this one goes. I think we're all curiously interested in this.
Mm-hmm. I think we all have our doubts. Everybody has their doubts. We'll get our... Maybe we'll get our answers.
Okay. Speaking of answers, I had Don Waddell on the radio show the other day, new general manager for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And he said a couple of interesting things. He did mention when he was in Carolina, him and Kekalainen were working on a deal to send Elvis Merzlikins to the Carolina Hurricanes. That's when they were hunting for a goaltender. He mentioned that they need to clean up some contracts. I'm paraphrasing here, but something along the lines of we need to do something with the contracts that we have here. Not on. It's funny too because when he said that, Elliotte, the first thing I thought of was, Jim Rutherford said something similar, if not identical, when he went and took over with the Vancouver Canucks. So do with that what you see fit. And the other one was that he plans on being general manager here and keeping that title. Although in the back of my mind, I can't help thinking to myself, I'm not saying that he's lying. I truly believe that he's going to keep.
Are you calling Don Waddell a liar?
Here's what I'm saying.
Dom, I think you just have a headline for the pod. Don Waddell is a liar.
I think what he will probably do is shepherd along someone like Rick Nash.
Yeah, the key word
that's what I could see. I could see happening.
The key phrase I heard was a while. He's going to be the GM for a while. So that says to me that there's been talk about if Ken Holland leaves Edmonton and Don Waddell and Ken Holland have a long history, he could be the GM. I don't. Based on what I heard here, that's not happening. I heard he's going to be the GM for a while, and I agree. Someone like Nash makes a lot of sense. Now you mentioned another name there that I want to discuss. We could have potentially a GM trade here. Because I've heard that Jarmo Kekalainen is a contender in Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they've been doing interviews. I had one person who wondered to me if Eric Joyce, who was doing the interviews there, he might keep the job. But I've also heard Kekalainen's name as a contender there. But this is a unique one. Sorry, Jeff, were you about to say something?
I was just going to say, in the spirit of, good for the game and create buzz and do something, couldn't they not have, if this is the way that it's going to end up, could they not have just done a general manager trade for fun?
Oh, you know what? I knew you were going to say that. By the way, you had a tweet on Saturday night I thought was really embarrassing, but we're going to talk about that later.
Oh, the hats? Hats and the trophy?
That was an awful tweet. Just awful.
It was a great tweet.
And this idea of a GM trade, it's horrible. I got away from this on Friday. I got away from this on Friday, and then you bring back the awful on Sunday. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to say about the GM search in Carolina is, and I heard this from someone who did not interview, but knows a couple people who did, and that is that the Hurricanes are making sure everyone's eyes are wide open about how this is all going to work. And that is that whoever gets this job is going to be the manager, but they're not going to have the power. That this job is going to be as a facilitator, somebody who collects information, and brings it to the other members of the front office, well, including Tom Dundon, who obviously has a huge say. Yeah. But Eric Tulsky, Darren York, whoever's going to fulfill, Aaron Schwartz, whoever's going to be part of that front office. But the new GM hire is not going to have the final say. And what this person told me is that that some people have kind of backed away from the process because of this, that this is not going to be a traditional job. I personally think that you have to make people's eyes wide open. Like if it's going to work like this, you better tell people that going in, and Carolina is doing that. But and I think there's always people who think, well, you know what, I'll get the title, I'll go in there and I'm going to run the show. That is not going to happen here. I think that they are making it very clear that whoever gets this job is going to be in the role that I kind of described a couple seconds ago, but won't have the final say. And I think there are people who are okay with that, but I think there are some who aren't. And I've heard that Kekalainen is one of the people that is kind of is in the conversation here.
That would be an interesting one. We'll stay tuned to see what happens there. Okay. Meanwhile, speaking of hires, very quietly last week, and everyone in the USHL. I mean, this is a big story in that league. Calle Larson,
yes,
who had been with Dubuque, the Fighting Saints of the USHL for a number of years, hired by the Edmonton Oilers, Senior Director of Player Development. What's the story on this one?
So I got a text last week from a friend of mine who is in the scouting business, and he said to watch this name, Calle Larson. And I said, okay, tell me about him. It wasn't a name that I really knew. And he said that this was a guy who has had a chance to leave Dubuque before and has been very, very picky. And this guy is a big fan of Larson's. He'd never mentioned him to me before last week, but he sent me a note saying, heads up, he's on the move, and I think it's a great get for whichever organization gets him. And he actually thought that Larson was going to Ottawa, and obviously that wasn't the case. He actually thought Ottawa, and then when I said, I don't think it's Ottawa, he said Pittsburgh, and obviously it wasn't Pittsburgh. I was like, keep guessing. I said to this guy, you're like prime Mark McGuire right now. You're either hitting it into the fifth deck. You're right. This guy's getting a job, but you're swinging and missing and striking out with where he's going. So we ended up in Edmonton. And, when it came out, like I said, oh, it's Edmonton. And the guy said, boy, that is a great hire for the Oilers. And, I went around, I asked some other people, and, who knew this guy, who knew Calle Larson. I shouldn't say this guy, like that's so disrespectful, who knew Calle Larson better than I do. And, they said that it is true. Like some teams have tried to pluck him out of the USHL before, and he's always resisted. So it probably is a very good sign that Edmonton got him. But this is the information I got. Like he's a guy who's played, he's coached, he's scouted, he's managed, he's a senior executive. Obviously, he knows young players very well because he's worked with them in the USHL, and I think that was something that's important to a lot of teams right now. How do millennials think? How do you communicate effectively with them? And, he's been GM president of that team, so he knows how to manage his staff. He has to think big, and, he's a pretty organized, smart guy. Like I heard really good things about him. Like I said, I don't know him at all. It was recommended to me. Chris Peters, who does a great job covering hockey, he has a podcast with him. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to listen to it. But that was recommended to me as well. But, a couple guys did tell me that's a nice little coup for Edmonton to get Larson because he's turned down some jobs before and now he's going to be an Oiler.
Elliotte, we should mention as well, congratulations to the Saginaw Spirits, who on Sunday captured the Memorial Cup, defeating the London Knights in a thrilling game. 4-3, 20 seconds left. Josh Bloom, who's a Vancouver Canucks prospect, an overager who had a really interesting year playing in the ECHL, playing in the AHL with Abbotsford, then getting sent back to North Bay, subsequently traded to Saginaw. He started in Saginaw, was a captain. They traded him to North Bay last year, have a chance to go chase a championship. He comes back. He's the hero. Owen Beck, the Montreal Canadiens prospect, with a pair of goals in this one. Saginaw went up 3-0. London came back, surprise, surprise, to tie it at threes. And then Josh Bloom ends it 4-3 is the final. Congratulations to the host team. Congrats to Chris Lazary, the head coach, Dave Drinkle, the general manager, and Craig Goslin as well, who has gone above and beyond and reached into his wallet. He's the owner, one of the owners of this team, who's been fantastic for not just the team, but the city as well, and a tremendous job hosting. So congratulations to the Saginaw Spirit, Elliotte.
It sounded like this was a heck of a game. I was following it on X.
Oh.
Was it that good?
It was wild, back and forth. Because it's always good when you have the host team in the final because the crowd is so great. And the crowd was great with Saginaw as they went up 3-0. And the shots on goal, Elliotte, wait for it, were 20-1.
Didn't they score on their second shot, London?
Yeah, yes, on their second shot to make it 3-1. Easton Cowan scored, Sam Dickinson scored, and then all of a sudden that crowd, because it's London and you've seen London do this before, all of a sudden the crowd kind of gets that nervous, that anxiety feel like, the tide has turned here. And then 20 seconds left, Josh Bloom ends it, and it's the proverbial cork out of a champagne bottle with the Saginaw Spirit fans. It was a wild one. And now, Elliotte, the questions become, what happens with Mark Hunter, the manager and owner of the London Knights?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Saginaw. I saw a stat. They were the first U.S.-based OHL team to win the Memorial Cup. I didn't realize that.
Yep.
I would have thought Plymouth had some good teams.
Nope.
And Erie had some good teams. But
Detroit had some good teams.
Detroit
in the 90s
had some
too.
really good teams. Yeah, I was like, whoa, I kind of thought one had. So congratulations to them on that great accomplishment. With Mark Hunter, depending on what would happen with Ken Holland here in Edmonton, I kind of wondered if Hunter would be the GM. I'm less convinced of that now. I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. It's going to be an interesting time for Edmonton because now the last day of the finals, the 24th, There's a board of governors meeting on the 26th, the awards on the 27th, draft 28th, 29th, and free agency the 1st. I don't know where this is all going to go here, but it is possible that the current management team of the Oilers is going to be making all these decisions. And if there is going to be another general manager, that person may not be involved in this draft. And I don't know. I would say it's 100%, but I think it's possible. And so look, if you win the Stanley Cup, who cares, right? But it's a very unusual situation because of how close this is to the draft and the fact that, your general manager's contract is up. So It's a really fascinating dynamic. And, I know people get upset by how late the Stanley Cup Final is. Now that ESPN is a TV partner, because they have the baseball playoffs in the first week of October, season's going to start the second week of October for as long as ESPN's involved.
Ottawa Senators and the coaching staff. What's this whole beast going to look like?
It sounds like it's going to be Bruce Garriock had a report that Daniel Alfredson is going to stay on the coaching staff, and I've heard similar. It sounds like that coaching staff is going to be Mike Yeo, Nolan Baumgartner, Alfredson, and Ben Sexton. Like that sounds like what the group is going to be. I still hear some conversation about Lane Lambert and Toronto. I'm also less certain about Mark Hunter and Edmonton. I know we just talked about Edmonton. I should have done this there, but I don't think in a linear way. My head goes all over the place. I'm less convinced about Hunter as GM in Edmonton. I wonder if there is a role for them there if he wants it, but I'm less convinced of him as GM there now. But we'll see. But it sounds like some of these moves are starting to happen.
And we'll finish up the news segment with this name, and this won't get much attention. Mitch Marner, recently photographed in a
coffee shop
in the West End of Toronto with head coach Craig Berube. What is your spidey sense saying on Mitch Marner and Toronto Elliotte?
So everybody is really trying to not pour gasoline on the fire here, Jeff. So let's do it.
No, here we go. Crack it open.
Yeah.
Who's got the matches?
Everybody's trying to be really careful here. But one of the things that a few people have told me is not to be surprised if this plays out over next season with Marner in Toronto. Now, there's a lot of time between here and then, and things can always change. But this is such a delicate conversation between player and team because everyone is determined to look like a winner here. The Leafs are determined to either make a good trade or, with the cap room that's created by that trade, do something big that they know they can't afford to have a swing and a miss with this one. And also the player is determined, and more importantly, the people around the player are determined to do this that make themselves look good, that they're not going to agree to anything that they think puts them in a bad light. So this is a really complicated thing going in. I want to throw a couple other points out there to you. Number one, I think that there is some real concern about how the Toronto fans will react to Marner if he starts next year unsigned. And you can't avoid that. And, some people and me, I'm the kind of person who's like, look, if you want to bet on yourself, bet on yourself. I've bet on myself before. Other people have bet on themselves before. If that's what Marner wants to do, I think he has all the right in the world to do it. But he has to understand that some of the fan base is not going to react very well to that. And you have to play through that. Are you comfortable with that? Can you handle that? And I do believe that's one of the things that's been discussed. And I think with the Maple Leafs, the other issue that they are dealing with here, and I think there are people in the organization who feel very strongly about this, is that they traded Nazem Kadri a couple years ago when they were mad at him. And look, Kadri got suspended twice in a row, There are people who felt very strongly at the time that they had to make that trade. But Nazem Kadri went somewhere else, sorted himself out, was a critical member of a Stanley Cup champion, and is a player that Toronto very much missed after he left. And I think there are people in the organization who are looking at this and believe, could this be Kadri too? Where Marner goes somewhere else, the spotlight is less intense, he learns how to balance everything, and goes out and becomes a key player on a Stanley Cup champion in another city, which I do believe could happen. To me, that is a very legitimate thing, that Marner could go somewhere else quieter and really thrive. I think he's a great player, and I think he could become an even better player without the spotlight. And I do think there are people in the organization who are very scared of the possibility of that happening. And I think that's part of the background to all this. So, look, like, if the contract demands on both sides are crazy, it's going to lead to an eventual divorce anyway. But I have to tell you, I don't think there's a certain, I know there's people who are like 100% he's getting traded. On Sunday, June the 2nd, I don't know that I'm so certain of that. And I think one of the biggest challenges here are going to be the sort of like the feelings of everybody involved. I just think that this is going to take a lot of diplomacy for a lot of people to do properly.
You're right. This is a delicate one. You always run the risk in this situation of going into next season, obviously without a contract. And then here come the howls of, I'll just be blunt, Elliotte, Muskoka 5, the sequel. And how do you handle skating through that? Like, you remember when that happened, and those were some, veteran players with some pretty stiff spines, Matt Sundin and Brian McCabe and Darcy Tucker. I think if both you're the player and the organization, I don't think you want the player to go through that, and I don't think you want the team to go through that. That's why this one has the potential to be a firecracker. And that's why I agree with you when I say this one is a really tricky one to sort out.
Yeah. Because anytime there's a report that paints one side in a bad light or says this one person has to do this, I think people get their backs up.
I agree. All right. That is a story that will not go away. Unlike us, we will take a pause. We'll come back with the Montana Hotline.
Unfortunately for you, we are not going away.
Unfortunately, there's more of our blather coming up here in a couple of moments. Montana's Thought Line, and then what's next for the New York Rangers? Still to come on this podcast. Listen to the 32 Thoughts podcast ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to the podcast. Time now for the Montana's Thought Line. Montana's Barbecue and Bar, Canada's home for barbecue.
Try the ribs. Try the ribs. You got to try ribs.
Thank you to Rick Turner, 32 Thoughts at Sportsnet.ca, the way to get in. Also, 1-833-311-3232. As always, the Montana's Thought Line, curated lovingly by Griffin Porter. We'll start in beautiful Duncan, BC. I love Duncan. That's where my sister and her family lives.
Nice.
Joel from Duncan, BC. Hey, Jelly Dom. I was scouring the internet in search of pro stock Maple Leaf hockey gloves and came across these that were made for Chris Tanev. Do you suppose that these might have been made in anticipation of Tanev joining the Toronto Maple Leafs in a trade that fell through? If I'm correct, can I get fast track to be Elliotte's successor as a hockey insider so I can, quote, try the ribs all across North America? I always wanted to get paid to talk hockey. Love the pod. Will continue to listen religiously as I do. Joel, thanks a lot for that one. Pro return gloves with Kris Tanev's name on a pair of maple leaf colored mitts. You know what happens, Elliotte? I'll just be blunt.
Okay.
When a stick rep or a glove rep, equipment rep for any major manufacturer, who obviously they always talk to their clients, when the client says, look, I'm going to waive my no trade and it's going to be one of these 3 teams, that rep gets to action and starts to order things just in case. Because when the player waives and arrives in a new market, the gloves and such need to be there. Did you ever wonder how quickly it is that a player arrives in a new city and bam, all of a sudden, wow, how did he get green gloves so quickly with his name and number on them? I think that's what happens in these situations, Elliotte.
That's true. And I don't blame the companies at all for bebeing on top of that. Good
Smart.
on them. I think that's planning. I remember years ago, there was a writer for MapleLeafs.com, and they put up when Sergei Gonchar's name was linked to the Maple Leafs and trade rumors, he put up what's called a ghost page on the Leafs website with a Gonchar profile in case he got traded. So this editor or writer or whoever they were just being on top of their game. Look, we've acquired Sergei Gonchar. I've already got a page ready for them. Well, you have to create a URL for that, and some Leaf fan typed Sergei Gonchar's name into the Leaf roster, figured out the URL and typed in Gonchar's name, and lo and behold, there was the page, and people were like, oh my God, the Leafs have traded for Gonchar, which hadn't happened. And I remember it caused the Leafs some aggravation, and I asked someone who was working for the team at the time, this person's not in any trouble, are they? And they were going, well, we're not really sure what to think about all this. And I said they were trying to be conscientious and on top of their game. And happily, they saw it the same way. They completely understand. But yes, that's what happens. For example, Jeff, I'm not going to say what it was because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But one of the ways I knew about a trade, and you knew about a trade, was because the player had said, get me some gloves in this particular color.
Correct. Again, never revealing that player's name, but I think that happens on a consistent basis. That happens a lot. And that's
it's a great question.
That's just smart.
True.
That's smart by the manufacturer. I really think that's really wise for the manufacturer.
I cannot blame someone for wanting to be ahead of the game. Just like I couldn't blame that editor-writer for wanting to be prepared, I can't blame the manufacturing company, the equipment company, from saying, I'm going to be ready for my client. It's good business.
Hate to break the news to you, but there's already obits that are written for a lot of players who are in their advanced ages right now. And when they do pass, all you do is fill out the final year at the end of the last paragraph and hit send. That's being prepared. As ghoulish as that may sound.
Yep.
Let's get to a voicemail. Brett in Maryland.
Hey, Brett from Maryland. Big fan of the show. I was watching Game 4 with New York and Florida, and on Florida's first goal, I noticed the flashing lights in the puck. I was wondering if you guys noticed that as well, if you'd seen it or heard about it, and whether it was the NHL that installed the lights in the puck or if it's something ESPN is doing. And I've also long wondered if it was some sort of tracking device in the puck so I could see if it crossed the goal line. Anyway, bye.
Bye, Brett. Thank you for listening.
Yes. It's aliens, actually. Alien technology, alien pucks is
whenever my hair looks really bad, someone sends me that guy from the History Channel going, it's the aliens. That's pretty funny, Merrick. So the answer is yes, it's the puck tracking, but I'll also say that was unusual. That doesn't really happen. And there was someone on X who had a tweet that went viral asking what that was. And it is the sensors. There's no question about that, but that's not usual. And one of the things I wondered, because I said that I've never seen that before. And I asked if they were testing maybe, because there is puck tracking, but there's nothing to test if it's over the line in a legal goal. And that was actually the first thing I wondered, is if they were testing something like that, like a new system that allowed that reacted like that if the puck was completely in over the line. The response I got was, Elliotte, do you think we'd really be testing something new for Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Final? Do you think we'd really be fooling around with the pucks there? And I was like, good point. You got me on that one. So it's not like they're testing anything. Jeff, you have an alternate theory.
Yeah, it's the simplest one. It's just a trick of the light. Like, this is like, there's a sort of element of the old Twilight Zone. The monsters are due on Maple Street. You want to make people turn on each other, just flick the lights off and on a couple of different times, and they'll lead to wild conspiracy theories, and they'll eventually turn on each other. I'm with you on the puck trackers, and I just think that this was a case of, it was just a trick of the light. Like, that's it. That's what I believe. No conspiracy. Easiest explanation. I wish it was more sophisticated than that, and we can go deeper into it. But Elliotte, in this case, I don't think I can.
By the way, Jeff, that is an outstanding Twilight Zone reference.
It's one of my favorite ones. It's one of my favorite.
I would recommend that if you've never watched the original Twilight Zone, that is a great episode because it still holds true today.
Oh, yes,
and I know people who like the Gorilla on the Wing episode with William Shatner, but I've never watched it all. I've only heard about it.
The Monsters That Do on Maple Street is the best one.
Yeah, it's great episode.
By Rod Serling. Also wrote Planet of the Apes. Did you know that, Elliotte?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. I'm a huge Rod Serling fan. One day, Elliotte, we'll get into the genius of Rod Serling.
Okay. He was a genius.
In the meantime, let's read Alex's question. And I love people that send in questions that you and I have moaned about years and years ago. And here's our chance to complain about something again. From Alex, we'll end on this one. With the home teams performing so poorly in the past several years in the playoffs, is it time for the NHL to unstandardize the ice surface? I believe the NHL should take a page out of international football's playbook and offer teams a range for their home ice surface. For example, rink length, 180 by 200 with 80 to 100, and the radius of the corners, 22 feet to 28 feet. I believe this would allow for a greater variety of team strategies to flourish, as small and fast teams could build a larger ice surface to better exploit their speed, and larger, more gritty teams could make the rink smaller to really frustrate the opposition. I'm curious what you two think. The legitimate home ice advantage question from Alex, Elliotte.
I would have no problem if teams wanted to do that. I would be very curious to know what the NHL would think about that. There used to be the rinks that did that, but I have no problem with that. The only thing is I don't want stupid stuff like at Minute Maid Park where the Astros play where they had that hill going up to the center field wall.
Yeah, I can do it. I can do without that.
Stupid.
I can do that. But as far as like rink dimensions or, tighter corners, things like that, like I'm fine with it. And I like it because it's not just about, like, as Alex says, like that really winks at how you construct your roster. Yeah. And you build your roster around your rink. You don't build your roster around the rink. Like, I really think that and I was having this conversation. It's funny. I was having this conversation on Saturday night with someone watching the game. We were going back and forth on DM. And I really think that the NHL...
You slide into people's DMs, Merrick?
Well, this is actually someone sliding into my DMs talking about a super sexy topic, which is NHL arenas. Oh, baby.
I could see you being an internet creeper.
Yeah, that's my style. But the conversation revolved around, like, I was trying to make the point that I think that in the last round of rinks being made, and now Calgary's got a new one on the horizon, that they didn't make it mandatory that you had the potential, like just the potential to expand the rink, and not by the standard of the International Ice Hockey Federation. I don't want 200 by 100, but even just to have the option to make things a little bit wider. Now they've missed it, and it'll be, cost prohibitive now and too labor intensive to do it. But I do think that the NHL missed out on an opportunity to just prepare, because you never know where the game's going to be at, Elliotte, like 15 years from now, 20 years from now, heck, 10 years from now. At least give yourself the opportunity to reconfigure the rink a little bit if the game and its innovations necessitate it. But to Alex's point, I really like the idea, because then you have teams that are built for your arena, and you really do have home ice advantage. And you see it in drafting, and you see it in trading, and you see it in who gets picked up on waivers, etc. I love all of that. So Alex, thank you for that question. Joel, thank you for the question. And a very laid back and chill Brett from Maryland, thanks for the voicemail. Montana's Thought Line, Montana's Barbecue and Bar, Canada's home for barbecue. What is next for the New York Rangers? The answer in moments.
Jeff, Elliotte, and Tom on 32 Thoughts. Try their ribs today. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back to 32 Thoughts, the podcast presented by the GMC Sierra Elevation. So Elliotte, what becomes now of the President's Trophy winners, the Metropolitan Division winners, a team that made it to the Eastern Conference Final, a team that made it to the Stanley Cup Final in 2014, a team whose anniversary of winning the Stanley Cup stretched back 30 years, and we were celebrating it this year, thinking maybe, just maybe, they can end another cup drought. What happens next to the New York Rangers?
The number one thing is Shesterkin. What's his next contract going to look like? Everything else for them is option B. He was their best player in the playoffs. I thought Florida deserved to win the series. As our parents always tell us, life is not fair, but it was fair that Florida won. They were the better team, and Shesterkin was marvelous. So to me, when you take a look at their entire contract situation and every decision that has to get made, Shesterkin is the key. What's his next number going to be? You know, for example, I had someone who said to me, he's got them in a really tough spot. The Rangers part of this negotiation is going to be, and this is exactly how it's going to go. It's going to be the same thing that McDavid gets and Matthews gets and McKinnon gets and all the great players get. And the way you start these negotiations is say, look, Igor, you deserve whatever you can get. Whatever you want, you deserve it. However, how can we do this in a way that we can still win around you, where we can reward you, but we can build a team around you? Because, the cap's going to go up. He'll have this contract for another year. Then the cap will go up another 5%. And then, barring any major changes, we're expecting a big jump. But you're still going to say to him, there's a limit to what we can do and still win. So that's the sweet spot here is, Igor, whatever you want, but how can we make it so we can win? So that's number one.
Hang on. What do the Rangers do if he comes back and he says, which goaltender was better in the Eastern Conference Final, me or Bobrovsky? Well, you, Igor. Okay, I'll take Bobrovsky's deal.
Well, I got to tell you something. If that's what it's going to cost you, you take that and you laugh. You roll out the 7 times 10. You say, Igor, we'll sign that right now. Like I think they're going to be fortunate if it's as low as 10.
You do, eh? So you think he's headed for number one goaltender status for salary?
Why not? Why shouldn't he be?
I'm just used to goaltenders all coming in underneath that. Like I was thinking of like Sorokin's 8.5.
No.
Wow.
No.
Okay.
No.
Well,
No.
Then look out. We'll have a new clubhouse leader.
5.7. Like honestly, like do you think I'm nuts for saying that they're lucky if this turns out to be 7 times 10?
I'm fine with it. All I'm saying is the one position that I always say is underpaid are goaltenders, and we've seen it consistently. All these guys, I think when you consider how important they are to a team, I know everyone moans about how much they're paying their goaltender. Well, try life without one.
Yes.
Try life without one.
So this extension, I could always be wrong. I've been wrong before. I will be shocked. Shocked, I tell you. And appalled. Maybe not appalled, but shocked. I wouldn't be appalled because people are entitled to sign the deals that they want to sign. I would be shocked if this isn't the number one goalie deal in the league. And it's good.
Wow.
I feel very confident in predicting that.
Well, I'll get ready for a whopper then. Not saying that he doesn't deserve it, but I'll tell you what. Did you think that when he was going through his lost time this season, when Jonathan Quick was the number one goaltender, and it really took until All-Star Weekend where Shesterkin finally was able to pull it back together, that we'd be talking like this in June?
No, but that was January and February, and this is now. And when
I get it.
When it really mattered, he was phenomenal.
Yep. He kept him in all of it.
Yeah, he gave them a chance.
He kept them in all of it. The numbers are in crazy. The BR Open Ice account on Twitter X, he faced 524 shots over 16 games, 926 save percentage. New York outshot 13 of their 16 games. This was goalie stand the bunch. With all due respect to everybody else on the Rangers, he was incredible.
Yeah, he was their best player, and you can argue whether or not he's the best goalie in the league, but his contract is coming up at just the right time, and he's going to get paid like it. And then after that, the next question might be, what are they going to do with Lafreniere's next deal?
Mm-hmm. Well, you want to talk about the emerging superstar all of a sudden. I mean, it's a wonderful bit of business that he was able to do for himself, and he has one more year until restricted free agency where he has arbitration rights. I don't think anyone expects it to get there, but nonetheless, and in the playoffs, as we kept waiting for the Kreiders and the Zibanejads and the Artemi Panarins to get going, game in, game out, consistently, Alexis Lafreniere produced. You got to hand it to him. And you got to hand it to Peter Laviolette. And I know during the regular season, we used to always joke and say, well, if you have a player who's having an issue, just put him with Artemi Panarin and, he's the eraser. He'll rub out any issue that you have. But good on Lafreniere, because you talk about the pressure about being number one overall pick and a number one overall pick in New York City with that spotlight and that glare. He's been able to overcome it, and he looks fantastic, Elliotte. He looks great.
And I always believe that if you're an organization and you believe somebody's a core part of your team, you sign them as early as you can for as long as you can, because the price never goes down. Now, the one thing I'll say here, first of all, the Rangers know him better than everybody else, so they can make this decision. But this is one of those situations where it wouldn't shock me, and I'm not reporting this because I'm much more confident about what I said about Shesterkin than I am about what I'm about to say about Lafreniere here.
Okay, be sloppy. Go. Be sloppy. Be sloppy. Go.
Well, this is one of those situations where I can see everybody agreeing to wait. Let's play it out. He's not an unrestricted free agent. Now, if the Rangers put money down on the table that everybody here is happy with, then you do the deal. But if the Rangers are at all unsure here that this is what he really is, or the agent says, I'm not really sure I want to give my guy more of a runway to show that he might be worth even more, this is one of those situations where I can see two sides deciding to wait and see what they've really got here. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I'm not saying it will happen, but this is one of those situations where if you said to me that both Lafreniere's camp and the Rangers camp said, we're going to let it play out and deal with it later, I would be okay with that. I would understand that. Now, I think one of the things that happens here, and I saw this all over social media on Sunday, and social media is not a true indicator of feelings, but you look at it, and all the Rangers fans, they're upset, they're disappointed. I would say everybody here, you cannot overreact to this loss. Yes, last year was bad, the first round loss to the Devils, but you've been to the Eastern Conference Final 2 of the last 3 years. That's really hard to do. It's not what you want more, but it's still an accomplishment. It's a really hard thing to do. And I think people have to recognize that this is a team that is a good team with a lot of good pieces. And, Fox was hurt. I have to say Miller, I think could have been better this year. I thought he was good, but I still think he can be better. I think there's more there. I wonder if the Capo Caco experiment, I wonder if they decide to move on from him. I thought Tkachuk was a stud.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the big one is about Trouba. And, look, by the way, I want to say one thing about that goal. The Rangers were not able to review that. They were not allowed to review that. I know some people actually said to me, why didn't they challenge? The reason is, even though the high stick happened in the offensive zone, the puck was touched in the neutral zone. And technically, that's still part of the play. A missed stoppage can only happen in the offensive zone. So Elliotte knows the rules. I learned that the hard way a few years ago with him. He was not allowed to challenge that. So if people were wondering why the Rangers didn't challenge, because the puck was touched in the neutral zone, they weren't allowed to do it. The one thing about Trouba is, and I know he's a polarizing guy, like Trouba, like you have a player there is unlike a lot of other players. And it does help the Rangers that Trouba terrifies people on the ice. Like, if you take him off that team, can he be better? 100%. He can be better, and I think he'd be the first guy to admit it. But if you take that guy off your team, you are losing something that a lot of other teams don't have. And I guarantee to you that there's a lot of players on that team and a lot of people in that organization who like the fact that they have one of the few guys in the NHL anymore that players are like, is that guy still on the ice? Because I'm a little nervous that he might kill me. And I think you'd really be losing something if you subtracted him from that team. Now, maybe they ultimately decide to do it, or he ultimately agrees to go somewhere. I don't know. I'm just talking out of my butt. It would really change the way that other teams feel about the Rangers. You would be really changing the identity of your team.
You would. He's a throwback guy. Once upon a time, how many guys did every team have of those on their blue line? Elliotte, like minimum 2, sometimes 3. I am with you on that one. He reminds you all that this is a dangerous game played by large men with ill intent. Anyhow, I think if you're a Ranger fan, like look at 2 of the last 3 years you've been in the conference final. As a matter of fact, when you look at New York based, if you look at New York area teams, like you had the Rangers, and then before that it was the Carolina Hurricanes. Before that, the Rangers, and then the two seasons before that was the New York Islanders.
Yeah.
Been a nice little run for the New York area teams here, Elliotte. Kind of spoiled. We talk about Tampa and Florida, your last 5 coming from the one state. Have a look at New York. They're doing okay too.
Like to me, when I look at the Rangers and what's going to make them better, they'll have to look around the margins and how do they improve? Do they feel they have to change some of their depth? Like, what do they have to do with that? But the key thing is, like, I'm looking at a lot of these guys like Miller, Trouba, Kreider, Zibanejad, Panarin. I'm going to all of them and I'm saying, guys, what do we need to do to get you guys to the next level? Do you have to rest more in the regular season? Like, how are we doing this? Because number one, it's still hard in this league to make the playoffs. And they have a roster that you feel pretty good is going to make the playoffs every year. That's not an insignificant thing. You don't want to screw around with that too much. But I'm looking at Zibanejad, who I think is a really good player, but his postseasons don't match his regular seasons. Mika, what do we have to do here to get you to the next level? Panarin, I thought, was good in the playoffs until this round. And the guy had an MVP level season this year. You're not getting rid of him, even if you wanted to. I thought Tkachuk was fantastic. What a season he had and what a personality he is. But like I look at that team and I say, we have good talent here. There's a reason we won the President's Trophy. There's a reason we've made the Eastern Conference Final 2 of the last 3 years. How do we squeeze more out of this orange? Yes, we got to bring in some people around you maybe. We always have to add. Fox was hurt. Other than that, I thought he was great. But that's what I'm looking at with these guys. We have to squeeze more out of the oranges we already have as opposed to getting rid of guys and because we might be mad at them for this last week.
Let me throw a name at you.
Okay.
Because I think the New York Rangers are basically coming back with a near identical team. Like I'm with you. Like jury is out on Capo Caco. As much as we talk about never giving up on kids and young players, you do wonder about the future of Capo Caco here. Let me throw a name out at you.
Okay.
Brennan Othman. Brennan Othman scored 21 goals this year with Hartford. Brennan Othman is a first-round draft pick
I think they're going to give
of the
him
New
every
York
chance
Rangers.
to show he can make the team.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you start to bring in more of those players from the American Hockey League. Like, he showed that he can play pro hockey. He can play in the American Hockey League. And I know it's tough to crack the left side of the New York Rangers. Trust me. I mean, you just mentioned Artemi Panarin, a Hart Trophy type season, and then you throw in Chris Kreider. Like, I get it. Like, it's hard. That left side is really a hard one to crack. But still, when you talk about players and, you know, making sure they're healthy and rested for the playoffs, I mean, one of two things. Three things. You can sign them for them, you can trade for them, or you can find them within your own organization. And that's why I keep coming back to, before you go out and make a deal, see what you have under your own hood. And I wonder if Brennan Othman is the answer to that question.
The one thing I do wonder, Jeff, I wonder if they regret not trading for Gensel.
That's a huge one. That is a big one. And
or someone like that.
They never,
someone like that.
Last year they brought in Kane and Tarasenko. Like, they took big swings for big name players. This year was sort of, you know, nipping around the edges, and they didn't do it. And they saw other teams around the Eastern Conference. Well, I mean, last year was the year that everyone in the East loaded up.
Yeah.
But Gensel was the big one, and Carolina got him, and Carolina paid a premium to get him. I do know what you mean. And I think that's going to be a major conversation in the offseason. You know, do we need to rethink that? You know, Carolina broke their mold to bring in Jake Gensel, as you mentioned a couple of different times. I mean, it's hard not to think that you missed it, right? It's hard not to think that, because you needed one more guy to score.
Yeah.
What couldn't the Rangers do by the end against the Florida Panthers? They couldn't score.
No.
They're getting saves. They just couldn't score. I think that's a great point. Now, because you mentioned it, I want to end the podcast with this. Not touching the Prince of Wales trophy, but putting
Can I
on
ask you
the We
something?
Are the
Why
Eastern
did you have to
Conference
send that
Champions.
out? I was so embarrassed for you.
Why? Why were you embarrassed about it?
Because it's embarrassing. It's such an embarrassingly Merrick tweet.
I've always I laugh at a lot of dumb traditions in sports. Right? You don't step on the logo on the floor. Well, don't put it on the floor if you don't want people to walk into your dressing room and step on it. I've always just found it weird the way there's this, don't touch the trophy, when I'm pretty sure that it's someone from the organization that brings the trophy into the dressing room. The players don't touch the conference trophies because it somehow jinxes their chance at winning the Stanley Cup.
But that doesn't mean that you have to put out such a dumb tweet like, how come you wear the hat?
The hat, which celebrates the fact that we've just won the Eastern Conference, but we won't touch the trophy that indicates that we've just won the Eastern Conference.
Do you ever watch Triumph the Insult comic dog?
Yes, of course. Yeah. The
do you remember? You know when he
hang on. Oh yeah, the Ed the Sock ripoff. Yes.
Okay, yeah. Triumph the Insult comic dog refers to people as super nerds. That tweet,
yes, I know
that tweet made you a super nerd. I was embarrassed for you.
How long have you known me? Like, serious? Like, do you think I'm ever gonna grow up? Like, you've known me
I
going
know
back to, like,
I am the picture of manliness, but that made you a super nerd.
Of course, it's total hockey geek. It's total hockey geek. Do you not find it odd though? The way that we're not here for that trophy, but we're here for this hat. We're the Eastern Conference champions.
Spent so much as a millisecond.
Yes, you did.
About that.
You thought about it on Saturday
you know what
night.
I thought about it? I thought about when I saw your tweet. And I was like, I thought about how stupid this is.
I know.
Okay,
you hang on. You went to bed Saturday thinking, "Damn it! I wish I would have tweeted that."
No. I thought the reverse of that. You know what I actually did think of when I was having that 22-hour travel day.
Oh, geez.
On Friday.
Yeah,
I thought about that. I was like an Arizona employee in the first 2 weeks of April. That I was that my life was being affected by decisions that were being made. I had no control over them, and someone knew the truth, but it wasn't the people who really needed to know the truth. That's what it felt like.
And like Charlie Brown, you just kept getting the football pulled away from you at the last moment. Like I know
six
no one
times
like
on
no
the
one,
plane, six times off. Oh.
I was going to ask you. No one wants
I don't
to
like
hear
to
media
complain about travels.
it. But how
that
many
was
times?
a tough one. 6.
It was, to me, it was funny at first, and Dom and I had our little giggle, and then it just got really bad. Like, oh, geez.
Well, you know what? The one thing I want to give people credit for, and if this happened, I didn't see it, but I don't think it happened based on the reactions that were out there.
Yeah.
Is that one thing I really hate is when travel goes badly, and people take it out on the flight attendants or the person at the counter. Like, those people have no control over this situation. The weather was bad. Someone sent me some pictures of the hailstones that hit in Dallas and Denver. They were the size of softballs. So it wasn't like this wasn't legitimate, but that was the thing I liked the most. Is I didn't see it, and I'm pretty sure it didn't happen. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But the flight attendants and the pilots thanked everyone for the way they handle it. But nobody lost it on any of those people or the gate agents.
Good.
Yeah, like they got no control over the situation. I hate it when I see people go crazy on them.
And let me end the podcast on this saying, and I've always reminded myself of this whenever I've had delays. Mm-hmm. I would much rather, Elliotte, be down here wishing I was up there than up there and wishing I was down here. And on that, we'll wrap. On those words of brilliance, after my tweet of brilliance on Saturday, which Elliotte very secretly wishes he had sent out himself. Don't be fooled here. That's it for the pod. 32 Thoughts. Thanks so much for listening. We're back on Wednesday morning.